Hello and welcome to Retro Game On, abbreviated to RRGO. The reason the retro is so retro is because today we're travelling back to 1977. Groovy. The Sheen 104 Video Sport, simply labelled on the box as TV Games, is possibly the oldest item in my collection. As you've probably already guessed, the 104 is a Pong clone. While these are a dime a dozen, I personally found this one interesting because it originates from Australia. So other Australians may find this interesting, but if you're from somewhere else, hopefully you'll find it interesting too, as it is a noteworthy insight from the 1970s game scene in Down Chunder. I've never owned a Pong console before, and honestly I've never really had much interest in owning one until I found this boxed at a vintage market recently. At only $30, it seemed too good not to pass up, especially since it ultimately ended up working. I couldn't turn down a vintage Kmart item either. I love Kmart. So, what do we have? Fantastic. Advertised are digital versions of hockey, tennis, squash, and handball. We're also promised compatibility with any black and white or colour television in Australia, indicating that, as expected, this is a PAL-only system. On the back, we're treated to a couple of screenshots promising great things. Just like real tennis! Football, 2 men each, lots of action. Otherwise, we have squash, yes, very fast, and a practice mode called handball. This is the only single player mode of the unit and really sums up a loner kid trying to play with a ball, doesn't it? You know, throwing a ball at a wall and catching it when it rebounds because you have no one to play with. A bit sad and a bit too real for my tastes. Below that, we have some fantastic haircuts and a full feature listing. It appears someone has also used this as a pen pad at some point before the new millennia, so that's nice too. Opening it up, we're greeted to disintegrating styrofoam and that sort of old smell. You know the one. But this kit is complete except for the manual. There's the main console itself, which has the coax cable hardwired in, and 2 controllers that plug in separately using 3.5mm jacks. Also included are some delightfully vintage batteries. Surprisingly, these hadn't spewed their guts everywhere, with only a few showing mild corrosion. For kicks and giggles, I decided to test a few to see if there was any juice left. Surprisingly, one of them measured over a volt. So, what do we have? How does it work? Well, the interface is quite simple. You have a slider to select between the different sports and also a reset button. It should be noted that pressing this is actually intended for the score. If you switch between modes willy-nilly, the score will remain. I guess an automatically resetting score as a feature was beyond the Pong on a chip that powers this thing, but more on that later. Otherwise, we have a few other switches that include the power, the speed, how large the bat is, and how versatile the deflection angles are. Difficulty modes, if you will. No sound outputs through the coax cable. Instead, there is a small, inbuilt, tinny speaker that emits sounds of sadness and annoyance. A volume knob or even the option to turn it off completely would have been nice, but I digress. Lastly, you can plug in a 9V power supply instead of 6 AA batteries if you so choose. The 2 controllers are quite simple. Since all you do is move a bat up and down a screen, the controller is solely comprised of a knob you turn backwards and forwards. Originally, I had intended to record footage using the video out of my VCR, but it refused to tune in the 104. It was buzzing away, so it did appear something was going on at least, but I wasn't able to confirm it working until I tuned it directly into my TV. I have no idea why the TV will accept it while my VCR doesn't, but regardless, it means the footage will be a recording of the TV screen for this video, so sorry about that. Okay, let's crack into the meat of things. First up, handball. Yes, good fun. It is only intended as a practice mode, but it should be noted that it does get quite difficult once you reduce the size of the bat, up the speed, and introduce 40-degree angles as well as 20 degrees. Like the other modes, the score caps out at 15, but since you're not versing anyone, it's sort of redundant. I guess you could time yourself independently and go for high scores and such, but you probably don't. Regardless, the end is signified by the ball going through the paddle until you reset. Next up, squash. I'm not the sporty type, but the once in a decade I do play, I actually enjoy it, so that's something. The rules are very much the same as real life in this version. A ball flies around the room, and the objective is to hit it, hoping your partner misses on the ball's return. Kind of like 3-dimensional tennis where both players face the same direction. That frantic feeling is definitely replicated when you turn the speed up, but it can be difficult to tell who hit the ball sometimes, since all you see are two identical bats on nearly the same vertical plane going for the same flying white pixel. Moving on. Let's play some football. Yeah, footy!
Kick the ball! Kick the bloody ball!
Mixing up the Pong derivative format a bit, here each player controls two paddles at the same time. One for defense, the other for the offense, on opposite sides of the screen. This one is fun since there is potential for a bit of strategy, but ultimately, it is what it is. There's not much to go into. So, alright, let's get into Pong. Tennis. What can be said about this that already hasn't? The groundbreaking 1972 Atari arcade game, which itself was based on an early Magnavox Odyssey game, has been in the public zeitgeist for my entire life. You hit a ball, it rebounds, and the aim is not to miss the opponent's reaction. And first to 15 is the greatest. Simple. Truly simple fun. Even though the graphics are as dated as they could possibly be, the gameplay is timeless and is still a lot of fun in the modern day. I'm unsure if this was the first home console in Australia to play Pong, but being dated to 1977, it would be pretty bloody close. Okay, I know you want me to crack it open, so let's get to it. First off, the controllers. These are not surprising at all. Two screws holding the casing for a potentiometer connected to a wire. Let's move on to the console. And the disassembly doesn't get much easier than this. There are 3 visible screws around the back, plus another hiding in the battery compartment. After that, it simply comes apart. Several wires are connecting the battery compartment and the speaker to the main board, but that's it. Unsurprisingly, the board is looking a bit grubby. There is this weird epoxy stuff over a portion of the board, and the caps look like they may have even been leaking. But hey, it is operational. It's kind of nice to see something without SMD components too. This looks like it would be pretty easy to repair if one of the components were to fail. And that includes the star of the show, the General Instruments AY3-8500, otherwise known as the ball and paddle. These are still available on eBay, so could be the basis of a fun project for a future video, although many are now manufactured by other companies. This awesome IC from 1976 includes a bunch of Pong derivatives, most of which I've already shown, plus a few light gun games, aptly named Rifle Game 1 and 2. These are not accessible here because of the lacking light gun peripheral. Or is it? Look at this slider. 2 selections are blocked by this soldered in botch thing. The pins on the IC are connected too. Further still, it looks like the casing could be used for multiple items, and there's even a printing on the board for a DIN socket. Could that be for the light gun? We'll have to investigate that further. But first, let's check what Mr. Sheen is all about. The 104 actually features on the Wikipedia page for the first generation of home consoles. It is a long list, but it was a surprise to see it. Here you can see a few other Sheen consoles from 1977 and 1978. Right after the 104 in the list is the 106C, which, as of the making of this video, is currently listed on the Cash Converters online store for an eye-watering $165. Jeez, in this economy? Not only is this in colour, which is most likely achieved by a companion IC to the 8500 successor, it includes a light gun. You can even see in the photo where those cutouts are that we saw earlier. As for Sheen itself, well, I couldn't find a whole lot on the company. It seems like they were primarily a distributor since the consoles were manufactured in Hong Kong. I love when an address is listed so I can be a voyeur on Street View, although this is largely pointless for an address from the 70s. We know they sold to Kmart, but I also found evidence that they sold electronics by mail order thanks to archived issues of Electronics Australia magazine. While there's no mention of the game consoles they sold, there's evidence of pocket calculators and digital watches. Must-have items for the average 1970s geek, I'm sure. I also found a manual online of the colour console. Of note are the Sheen service centre locations for each Australian state, although not the territories. Tough biggies, the Northern and Australian Capital Territories. Also, Tasmanians had to boat, fly or swim to an address in Melbourne, which is a different one listed on my box, but is the same as the adverts in Electronics Australia. Here's the address of what my local would have been in Perth. I don't know why I'm so fond of showing pointless Street View captures. I'm sure it didn't look like this in the late 70s. Anyway, let's see if we can get a light gun mode to go that we can't play. Desoldering the blockade, turning the switch, and, well, something happens, but it's not another 2 game modes. Shame, because that would have been cool. The pins for the games on the IC do run to the previously blocked off parts of the sliding switch, but I guess there must be something else missing. It's interesting that someone did go to the effort of soldering those connections anyway, but that just must be a side product of mass production on several similar consoles. However, that's about all I can possibly show you when it comes to the Sheen 104 Video Sport. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.